The Chair thanks the witnesses for their opening statements and now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I want to say just sort of at the outset that I believe we all appreciate not just the time that you've spent here with us today, but a significant amount of time with our committee and each of us leading up to today's hearing, because each of the witnesses has really dedicated yourselves to public service for our nation in one of the most important and sensitive and significant areas that I can think of. So we want to start out by thanking you for everything that you've done for our country. Mr. Zarate, in your opening statement, you talked about the complement of the different organizations, from Al-Qaeda to Al-Shabaab, from 2001 to 2015, from operations that cost as little as $1,000 to multi-million-dollar operations. So a lot has changed over the last 15 years. Some has not changed. Some has stayed the same. I was wondering if you could just sort of deeper discussion on this question of terror financing, how it's changed. Has it increased? Has it diminished as a global threat, say, during the last 10 to 15 years?
Chairman, thank you. And again, it's an honor to be here, so any help we can provide, absolutely willing to do so. I would categorize this in 3 different ways. I would say that there remains the networks that have long been the historic sources of funding for violent jihadi groups around the world, as well as state sponsors. And so those sources are there. What we did post 9/11 was to disrupt, dismantle them, deter them, suppress them. But with the rise of the Sunni-Shia fight, with the festering conflict in Syria, with, again, the need for humanitarian and charitable giving, some of those same networks, deep pocket donors, charities, again, are important and come to the fore. You saw just the other day the U.S. Treasury, in concert with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, jointly designated the Al-Furqan Foundation, a renamed charity from the past that continued to operate and continues to raise funds in Pakistan for purposes of Al-Qaeda. And so that's a demonstration that these networks, including networks, by the way, Al-Qaeda networks in Iran, which the Treasury has exposed, continue to operate to raise and move money. So that's there. Secondly, to Seth's point, and this is embedded in the testimony, these groups have grown more local in raising funds, and much of that revolves around their control of territory. And so the reality of terrorist financing in 2015 is that in order to disrupt terrorist financing of the type that we're describing, you have to dislodge these groups from territory. And so there's an even more important complement between our counterterrorism and our military campaigns and our counterterrorist financing campaigns than ever before. Because to dislodge ISIS from its sources of resources, you have to dislodge them from Mosul. You have to take away the oil resources they have. You have to cut off the channels that they use to get money and antiquities to brokers in Turkey and Kurdistan. And so there is a physical dimension to the problem that you didn't necessarily see in the 02 to 05 period. Finally, I think you have a blending of these groups. There's a quickening of the terrorist threat and the adaptation, where not just terrorist groups are beginning to operate. General Carter Ham talked about the coordination between Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab, for example, sharing money and weapons. But you also have groups like Hezbollah deeply embedded in working with organized crime and drug trafficking groups. And so what you have in this fluid global environment are groups and networks, terrorists and criminals, beginning to operate for profit with each other. And that, in addition, I think creates not just challenges but also opportunities. So that's a way I would frame this. I would say you have the old networks that are still of concern and are being resurrected, the local dimension, which revolves around control of territory, and then the blending of these networks and threats that raise and move money.
Dr. Schanzer, any follow-up?
Yeah, I would agree with just about everything that Juan has just stated, but I think I would note 2 things. One thing that has not changed at all is the challenge of deep pocket donors in the Gulf states. We knew that this was a problem in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and when you look at the statements that have come out of the Treasury Department, we continue to see challenges out of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, et cetera. This is an issue that we have not fully tackled yet. There has been better cooperation in some cases, but in some cases we continue to see these intransigent countries where they're not cracking down enough. I'm thinking of Qatar in particular. It's an incredibly problematic jurisdiction. One other note, and that is that we have, to a certain extent, become victims of our own success. The Treasury has done an excellent job of driving all of these actors out of the formal financial sector. It's a lot harder for them to move money in our banking system. So what they have done, as Juan has just noted, is they're now working more underground, local sources of funding. It makes it that much harder. And we heard from Mr. Lynch earlier about the cooperation that is needed, for example, in Africa and other areas of weak central authority. This becomes incredibly crucial once the formal financial sector has been shut down.
My time's expired, and now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.